That was Victor Oquendo reporting. So far, Brian Laundrie has been charged with unauthorized use of Gabby Petito's credit card. Technically, he is only a person of interest in her disappearance. Again, Gabby Petito died from strangulation. Her case now opening up a national conversation about partner abuse. Experts now hoping this tragedy will shine a light on a serious danger. Joining us now is Kelsey McKay. She's a domestic violence advocate and former prosecutor. She exclusively prosecuted strangulation-related crimes for 7 years. So obviously, this is a very tough conversation to have, but let's first off begin with your reaction to the news we learned yesterday.
About the cause and manner of death?
Exactly.
No surprise at all. I already knew that was likely what it was going to be, so it really just confirmed my instincts, which I think tells us that this is something, if we know more about it and understand it better, we can start to do better, because I didn't even have to see the autopsy to have an instinct that this was going to be the cause and manner.
Okay, so let's dive into this idea of strangulation. The actual definition is killing someone by squeezing their throat, but do you think this term should be used more loosely?
Yeah, so I mean, there's various definitions, and it really depends on if you're looking at the law. Under Utah law, it's a different definition. A lot of people focus on the words and whether you use choking or strangle, but really what I found to be really important and crucial is identifying the different acts that can result in asphyxiation. So not even just strangulation, but there are various things you can do to impede that natural process of oxygen circulating throughout the body. That can be by covering the nose and mouth. It can be by applying a pressure to the neck, which is strangulation, or it can be sitting on their chest or putting their head underwater. There's a lot of different ways to achieve this end. And we tend to be very focused on strangulation, and certainly that is relevant here. But it's important that we expand the definition to all different types of acts, criminal or otherwise, that could result in asphyxiation, because that is the area that we don't well understand.
Now, there's a lot of talk that this type of an assault can really be a red flag. So let's talk about how that can really start the conversation of a bigger problem.
Absolutely. I mean, we tend to only identify abuse when it's non-fatal, when we have some type of physical act. But abuse is something that goes much deeper and happens often well before there's a physical act. And that is anything that someone can do to instill fear to obtain compliance. And physical violence is kind of the last resort. Abusers tend to be strategic and not use physical violence unless they absolutely need to. So often we'll see victims in a situation that is abusive and not even be able to identify it, because we don't do a good job in our culture, in our society, explaining what those red flags are and how behavior can be abusive. And so it's really important to keep in mind that if we know what those red flags are and we can identify them as abusive, rather than excusing it or saying, oh, he just is having a hard time breaking up with you, or, we'll see offenders sometimes threaten to commit suicide, and then we gain empathy, oh, they have a mental health disorder. These are all identified tactics that abusers use to achieve control over a victim. Now, some of these tactics are red flags in that they are more indicative that a homicide or a serious assault is looming. And so this is validated research by Jackie Campbell that establishes these things that if we knew to identify better, like strangulation occurring, like threatening to commit suicide, like the victim being pregnant, there's a whole bunch of things that help indicate that there is an increased likelihood that this can result in serious injury or homicide. And strangulation is one of those factors. We know that when there's been a non-fatal strangulation, that victim is now 7 to 8 times more likely to be murdered by that intimate partner. So strangulation plays a role not only in the non-fatal predictive aspect of solving and preventing domestic violence, but obviously, as you see in this case, it can also be used as a tool, a weapon of homicide.
Finally, in our moments here we have you, let's talk about prevention and education. What can we do as a community, as a world, really, to prevent these horrible things from happening?
That's a big question with a little bit of time, but I will do my best. One is education. So much of what we do in Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is this month, is to tell people statistics, right? This many women experience it. The problem is our society doesn't even understand domestic violence. So we have to start to talk about things beyond physical acts, because when law enforcement relies on a physical act, we miss abuse entirely and our community doesn't understand it. Then a victim can't identify it, gets discounted, and then we miss the red flags that can predict and prevent a homicide if we can do better. So in strangulation specific cases, what we can do is really educate our first responders in our community. But in this case, of course, had these first responders had better training on how to identify strangulation or other red flags that existed and that I saw throughout the transcript of the call, very normal mistakes that are made because officers don't get adequate training on these nuanced conversations around coercive control and abuse. So they rely and they lean on that physical act. So you hear even Gabby saying, you know, he grabbed me, which indicates it could have been a strangulation, and officers immediately discount that and say, well, did he hit you? And we see this all the time. So it's really important that we give officers tools to better identify these acts of strangulation, because they can't be guided by visible injury, because that often doesn't exist externally. So I recommend, we have some great resources. If you go to respondagainstviolence.org, we have a strangulation supplement that I created over the course of the last 15 years that gives a guide to our first responders when they come to these calls, so that they can better evaluate, collect evidence, and really even determine if it occurred. Because often when you are told you're strangled, they look at your neck, they don't see an injury, and they move on. There is so much evidence beneath the surface. And so this conversation can be really important. And I hope that Gabby's death doesn't go without purpose. And I think part of that purpose is starting this conversation about equipping our officers to be able to do better investigations by giving them the training and the tools that they need. Utah has a law, but the implementation is a whole nother game. So I encourage you guys to get that form, and we have a roll call series for officers as well. So reach out to us and we can get you trained up and give you the tools that you need to do better in these cases.
Okay, Kelsey, so much great information today. We really appreciate your time and all that you do to hopefully, as you said, make Gabby's death not be in vain and something bigger learned from this situation. So Kelsey McKay, again, we say thank you so much for your time today.